All right. So we're going to look at how to calculate the average and what that means. I just want to say off the bat, it's also called the mean. That's the mathematical term for average. I'm going to use average because it's what we use colloquially when we're just talking with other people. So first of all, when to use average. The idea for average is that if you look at a number like that, okay, you can understand 25. You can picture 25 marbles or what 25 years old looks like or 25% on a test. However, when you have a group of numbers, it's harder for your brain to process what this means and how kind of the entire group is doing. So what we do is we make one number. So average is really one number to represent a group of numbers. Then our brains can better understand it. Some ways to think of average is it's kind of like the middle number, but really you just want to think that it is representative. That is our goal, to make a number that represents a group of numbers. So for example, if we have this group of people, there's these 5 people and these are their ages listed. We want to find what's the average age. So looking at that whole group, what's kind of the middle number, what number represents what all their ages are. So the average formula is you write the total of all the numbers and you divide it by the number of numbers. Okay, so in this example, we're going to do the total, which is adding all these numbers together. Okay, and we're going to divide by 5 because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 numbers. So when we actually do this math, we get, put it in, so 31 plus 30 plus 26 plus 21 plus 18 gave me 126. Okay, then we're going to divide it by 5, and it gives me the average of 25.2. And so in this case, it was their age, so that's going to be years old. So basically, this tells me that looking at this whole group, the average for the whole group is 25.2 years old. Now, there's another thing we need to look at called outliers. Outliers is when you have one or maybe 2 numbers, a couple numbers that don't really fit with the rest of the pattern. So if we looked again at these numbers, it's pretty easy to see that this Vincent is much, much younger than the rest of them. These are all pretty close to each other, whereas Vincent's age is much, much lower. So what we're going to do with an outlier is we're actually just going to remove it from the group. We're going to cancel it out. Now, the more numbers you have, the easier it is to take out an outlier. When you only have a few numbers, it's hard to take out an outlier. So if you had like 10, 100, and 90, obviously 10 is very different, but you only have 3 numbers, so it's hard to take it away because that takes out like a third of the numbers. In this case, there was 5, so taking away 1 is okay. It'd be a lot easier if we had other numbers like this. So if we had 10 numbers and we were just taking 1 out, that would be a lot better. Now, it's usually a judgment call. We're not going to go over like a formula to calculate which numbers are outliers. It's up to you to decide which ones are close, which ones are far. Had this number 10 been an 18, I would have kept it in because that's actually pretty close to 21. So we're going to remove this and we're going to recalculate the average. So again, the average is the total, which in this case is 31 plus 30 plus 26 plus 21. And we're going to divide it by the number of numbers. So in this case, we're going to put 4 because when we got rid of that 10, we left it so there's only 4 numbers now. So the formula is going to change and we're going to find our new number. So we got 108 divided by 4 gives you 27. So as we can see, when we took out the outlier, we got a different average. And this average is actually closer to what the actual numbers are because when we look at these three numbers are actually really close to 27. Whereas when we did the 25.2, it didn't fit as much because it was further away from other things. So the idea is you need to decide when you're doing a group, should I remove outliers or should I leave them? Does it make sense? What's the new average? Is that average better? Now, the last thing we're doing is weighted averages. This is where you have different groups of numbers. Sometimes it's just straight up numbers. You might have like, let's say 30 and 70. You know what? Let's say you ask people how many TVs they have. Okay, and you have 2 groups of people that you're going to ask. You have group A and group B. And for some reason, group A, there's a lot more of them in society, so you're going to say that's like 70%. Okay. Group B, there's only like 30% of them, so you're going to have 30%. Group A said, oh, well, they have like 4 TVs in their house. Group B said they only have 1. Okay. When you calculate the average, this number counts for more. It's more representative. So we got to use this 70% somehow. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take this number and multiply it by the percentage. We have to change this to a decimal because obviously like your calculator doesn't have percent. So we're going to write 0.7. And then we're going to take this and multiply it by 0.3. When we do that, we'll get new numbers. So we did the 4 times 0.7. That gave us 2.8. And we did the 1 times 0.3, and that gives me 0.3. Then we're going to add the numbers, and that gives us 3.1. That is the weighted average. If we had just averaged these two numbers straight up, it would have given us like 2.5. The idea with weighted average is that sometimes some numbers in the group are more important than other numbers, so it's more representative to use this weighted average. We'll give you another example, a little more complicated. So when you get your marks, okay, let's say this is one student's marks. Over here we have the weights. This is pretty common in school that some things are worth more than others. So for example, quizzes are worth 20% of your mark, tests are worth 50, and the one final exam is worth 30%. Your homework checks, you got 1 mark at the end of the year, it's worth 10%, it's worth a little bit. Okay, so this course had 5 units. You have unit 1 got 85 on the quiz and 60 on the test, 75 on the quiz and 65. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the average for all the quizzes, and that's going to be our quiz mark. Then we're going to find the average for all the tests, and that's going to be our test marks. Then we're going to use the weights. So the average for the quizzes, we're going to find the total and divide it by the number of numbers. So it's going to be divided by 5. The total is 85 plus 75 plus 80 plus 90 plus 60. So I got 390 divided by 5. That gave me 78. Okay, the homework stays 60 because there's only 1 mark. For the tests, we're going to do the same thing, add them together. Okay, that gave me 320 divided by 5 gives me 64. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take those numbers and we're going to multiply them by the weights. So now remember, the weights for 20% is 0.2, 10 is 0.1, 50 is 0.5, an exam is 0.3. When you multiply those numbers, you will get, let's write these out. So 0.2 times 78 gives me 15.6. 0.1 times 60 gives me 0.6. 64 times 0.5 gives me 32. And then 45 times 0.3 gives me 13.5. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add all of these weighted averages together to get the final weighted average for the course. So when I add these numbers, 6 plus 15.6, the total I got was 61.7. That is the final mark for this kid in the course based on the weights. The reason it was so low was because even though he did really well on these quizzes, the quizzes weren't worth very much. He did really bad on the exam and really bad on some of the tests, which gave him not a great test mark, which brought his final average down. Now, even though he failed the exam, the rest of his marks were high enough to boost his marks, so he ended up getting the 61. That's how you do weighted averages. You take the average and you multiply by the weight of each category, then you add those numbers together and it gives you your final average. That's it. That's how we have to do all the stuff with averages.